Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to why do so many American states have panhandles. I don't actually know anything to do with why this would be the case because the most obvious state is Oklahoma because it is literally in the shape of a pan with the handle. In terms of culture, when you've got like a panhandle, right, because you've got the main state which is like obviously Oklahoma, which is where the pan pot would be, and then the handle is surrounded by I think 3 other states. And I sort of think to myself, would the culture in that little area be a lot more similar to the states it's surrounded by, and not like obviously it's still in Oklahoma, but just culturally maybe it's a bit more. I mean, culturally they're all going to be somewhat similar anyway because they're all near each other. But is it just culturally more similar to the states that it's near to? Because in reality, it's like most people that live in that area will probably be closer to somewhat bigger cities or bigger towns in the states that it's surrounded by. And you got the same with Florida. There's more that I can't really think of off the top of my head, but I don't know the reason behind it, like why they've led to being like quite a few states with panhandles. I don't know why it's happened, but we're going to check this out. Hopefully going to enjoy. Links are in the description to my Patreon where you can see reactions that I can't post to YouTube, movies, TV series, all that stuff. But let's check this out.
Panhandles. A panhandle is, by definition, a narrow strip of territory projecting from the main territory of one state into another.
Here we go.
It's called this because it looks precisely like a panhandle, although boot heel is another term in some places, but less used. These are, however, common names, and the correct geographical term is, I believe, salient. While similar to a peninsula in shape, a salient is most often not surrounded by water on 3 sides. Instead, it has a land border on at least 2 sides and extends from the larger geographical body of the administrative unit. That's the official description. A few countries across the world have them within their borders. Namibia, for instance, has one whose origin is in its German and British colonial past. Argentina has a tiny one, Misiones. India has one too, with the 7 sister states, the largest panhandle in the world. And then we have the US. Some people call Alaska the panhandle of the US. I would say this is inaccurate because they're not territorially connected. It would have to be some type of magnetized panhandle that didn't actually connect to the pan but levitated it with magnetism. But anyway, you could also consider Florida a panhandle in its entirety, but it's a peninsula, and like we saw just now, those are different things. Despite not having an official panhandle as a country, the internal states of the US do, in some cases, have them. In this video, we're going to learn which they are and understand why they exist.
Here we go.
While some strips of land sometimes look like panhandles, not all of them are. They need to follow the official definition to be categorized as such. Utah has a narrow protrusion in its northwest, but it's not.
Okay, I mean, maybe by the definition, this is a panhandle. He's now going to say it's not, right? Because, I mean, at the same time, this doesn't look like a panhandle. I'm going to try and see some that might have panhandles. So you got Florida, Oklahoma. And to be fair, I can't really clock anything else. I don't know what other ones would have to be defined as a panhandle because they all look quite normal.
Officially a panhandle, South New York as well. So which are the official panhandles of US states? There are 10 of them in total in 9 different states. One of them has 2. Texas with its northern panhandle, West Virginia with this narrow strip of land that is sandwiched in between Ohio and Pennsylvania, and its eastern panhandle as well, towards Maryland and Washington DC. Alaska with this narrow coastline within Canada. Florida, perhaps one of the most famous panhandles within the US. It's the part of northern Florida that isn't in the peninsula. Connecticut, which also has a panhandle, pretty much only by definition. It's so small that it doesn't really...
I didn't even know this was the shape of Connecticut. That's such a random little panhandle there.
Look like one. Idaho in the northern part of the state. Nebraska in this western area. Maryland in the west too, and perhaps the most iconic of
Maryland looks like it is just a panhandle in general. It's such a weirdly shaped state.
Oklahoma with this tiny horizontal strip of land above Texas, actually above Texas's own panhandle. It's also interesting to point out that out of these 10 panhandles, 4 of them exist together in groups of 2. Oklahoma's and Texas's panhandles are connected. The same thing happens with West Virginia's eastern panhandle and Maryland's western one. So now that we've learned which US states have panhandles and what those look like, let's learn why they exist. Surely most people will agree that they don't really look good on a map. and it would be much easier to just add it to a neighboring state for it to look cleaner. Furthermore, so many US states have straight lines as borders, so why are these exceptions? Let's find out. Starting with the ones I find most interesting, first Oklahoma. Oklahoma's panhandle was previously called No Man's Land or the Public Land Strip. In short, their panhandle can be traced back to Texas' admission to the Union and the complexities of slavery policies at the time. Texas, joining after the Missouri Compromise of 1820, had to cut off its northern territories to align with the Compromise's latitude restrictions on slave states. The Missouri Compromise stated that no slave states could exist above...
So it was initially part of Texas then? Damn. Oklahoma's got some free land. They must have been loving it.
The 36 degree...
Although I don't think it was initially in Oklahoma, because Oklahoma wasn't really, I guess, as it was today.
latitude line. It was a decision of either letting go of part of their land or to become a free state, so they dropped the land. Kansas, on the other hand, set its southern boundary at the 37-degree line, and so this 34-mile wide no man's land was left in between, belonging to no one for 40 years and then joining Oklahoma. Next, since it's nearby, Texas. Texas's panhandle is a result of its unique border formation during the Republic of Texas area following the conclusion of the Mexican-American War. Prior to joining the United States, they claimed a large territory, previously Mexican, extending northward into what is today New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Colorado. Subsequent negotiations, including the Compromise of 1850, determined the state's final boundaries and had Texas let go of that land, leaving them with a north.
Texas would have been a whole lot bigger than it even is now. That would be a weird... I mean, this would be probably the weirdest shaped state. What is that about? Imagine Texas was like this today. How the other states would now be based around that, I would have no idea.
Texas let go of that land, leaving them with a northern panhandle that's so large you wouldn't really notice it. Funnily enough, if they had kept the land they originally wanted, they would still have a panhandle stretching through Colorado and Wyoming. Moving on to Florida, its panhandle was at one point separate, existing as Western Florida. I have a full video about this coming up. And initially the whole panhandle was considerably longer, reaching all the way to the Mississippi River during its time as a Spanish territory, as they temporarily held French Louisiana as well. With the Louisiana purchased by the US from France, part of this old, longer panhandle was first annexed to the US and thus removed from Florida's territory. Spain handed over Florida itself to the US in 1821, and the panhandle, known as West Florida, became a part of Florida upon statehood. Alabama's officials supposedly felt cheated of the land and unsuccessfully petitioned for the panhandle multiple times. Despite defeats, there's a lingering sentiment of the panhandle being more connected to Alabama than Florida.
I was going to say that I remember hearing that before. Like, culturally, it's a lot more similar to the states it's actually closer to. But you can't really blame... I don't know if anyone actually finds this like an issue or not. I don't think people would. You can't blame the people in this region because, I mean, they're so far... Like, when you think of Florida, you think of, like, Miami, etc. And, like, the cities are all quite, like... They're all on this side, the major cities, right? Like, Jacksonville's up here. Orlando's, like, here. Miami's on the coast. And, yeah, like... It's just a lot of the major cities are in this area. And I guess the people who live here, they probably have like the big cities that they go to, like Louisiana here, or wherever like they go to, Mississippi or Alabama or whatever. Or like, even though Atlanta's quite far to be fair. But yeah, I mean, they're so much closer to these states and these cities. You can't really blame them culturally for being a lot more similar to the people in this area.
Evident in the time zone difference and cultural affiliations of its people. Let's travel to Alaska now. The panhandle is here, like we saw, this long, narrow strip of land next to Canada. The capital of the state, Juneau, is actually located there. In addition, the region is the center of Alaska's timber industry and a major fishing area. Its belonging to Alaska goes back to colonial disputes between Russia and Great Britain. Alaska was initially a Russian colony, and this strip of land was first populated by Russian explorers and whalers, with British and American settlers arriving later. In 1825, the Russian and British governments signed a treaty that set the southern border approximately where it is today. However, it did not establish a firm eastern boundary, and this led to panhandle potential. When the US bought Alaska from Russia, it included the panhandle. Later disputes and surveys took place, and eventually it was settled like this. In summary, it exists because the Russians beat the British to it, and the British never bothered to set a firm border there during colonial times. Idaho's panhandle is a vertical one, which sets it apart from most on this list a little. Idaho was once a much larger region as the Idaho Territory, which included some of Montana and most of Wyoming. The Panhandle seems to come from the loss of that extra territory, which was taken away with the creation of Montana and Washington. Although they could have just split it between them, since the Panhandle is in between both states, but I guess that their desired eastern and western borders, respectively, didn't meet. Then West Virginia with its two panhandles. First, the eastern one, its belonging to the state is connected with the secession from Virginia altogether. They claimed it at the time because it was the site of a strategic armory, imported for the internal conflict the country was fighting. West Virginia sided with the Union, which won the war, and so they got to keep it. While West Virginia's northern panhandle was created while Virginia was still united with it. Annexed to the state after the Revolutionary War, when Virginia's northern boundary was set along the Ohio River as an agreement to settle colonial disputes between them and Pennsylvania. The Panhandle became an industrial center of iron and steel in the late 1800s due to its prime location along the Ohio River. Connecticut's Panhandle is pretty much non-existing, but it is officially one, so I guess we have to mention it here. The Panhandle's history dates back to 1650, when Dutch and English colonial leaders established the western boundary of the Connecticut colony. Disputes emerged with New York about it over the next decades. At one point, the governor of New York actually issued arrest warrants for residents of border towns who pledged allegiance to Connecticut. It's crazy to think that this type of dispute between parts of the same country existed. In 1683, New York and Connecticut finally settled their dispute, with Connecticut receiving the land. It was the first of the nation's 10 panhandles to be shown on a map. Next is Nebraska, where the panhandle is so big, it doesn't really look like one either.
Yeah.
Sort of the opposite.
It's a bit of a fake panhandle. I mean, again, by definition it is, but it looks a bit more like just a normal shaped state, really. I mean, just to make it a bit more normal, just complete get it down here and then just connect it like that. But other than that, it looks pretty normal. I mean, it's a bit of a weird shape, and it is, again, by definition a panhandle, but if you live here, you're probably still going to be culturally a lot more similar to people in Nebraska. Again, maybe not. I don't know how it really works. I don't know how the cultures really are. I mean, the surrounding states, people are probably all quite similar in these sort of surrounding areas anyway, so.
Opposite of Connecticut, and pretty much no one really knows why it's part of it. Some say it was what was left over after Colorado and South Dakota, as well as Wyoming, drew up their boundaries, so it naturally fell to Nebraska. What seems to be the actual reason is a little bit the opposite, though. Their territory extended further west, taken in part by the borders of those new states, and the panhandle was all that was left. And finally, Maryland.
This is a proper panhandle. And the thing is with Maryland, say DC becomes a state, or Washington DC becomes a state, what the hell is the shaping going to be then? I mean, it's already the most uniquely shaped state. It's so strange, but in the best way possible. But yeah, you get Washington DC becoming a state, and yeah, it's going to be even stranger.
Panhandle is so thinly connected to the rest of the state that it bothers me more than all the others. It's connected by a 1 mile strip of land.
It's 1 mile. That is wild. Like 1 mile is literally like me walking from where I am now to my city centre. That's probably like half a mile to my train station. That's insane. That's like a 20-minute walk, 30-minute walk. Jeez, man.
It dates back to 1781, when Maryland lobbied the Continental Congress to retain some of its western lands to secure access to farmland and the Mississippi River system. Pennsylvania had to let go of their claim on it for this to happen. Oddly enough, it was only after this request to have the Panhandle was fulfilled that Maryland agreed to become the 13th and final original state of the US. It's more mountainous and agriculture prone than the rest of the state, and has at one point attempted to secede as Western Maryland, although unsuccessfully. So, those are the 10 panhandles that the US has within its internal state borders. Which 9 states have them, where
There we go. Always an interesting look into these random sorts of things, but I do love these types of videos. Maryland wanted river access, that makes complete sense. Fun facts about the shape of Idaho. There are stories that the original border with what is now Montana was supposed to follow the Continental Divide. However, the border was surveyed more to the west, giving a big chunk of the west slope of the northern Rockies to Montana. I don't understand what makes Utah's protrusion not a panhandle though. Again, I mean, I always thought panhandles were like when it was just a lot thinner, but obviously that's not how it works. And fair enough. But like you said before, like panhandles in countries is a whole different ball game. Like that India one, because I think it's Bangladesh in between the panhandle. That's so wild to me. Because wasn't there like a city in Bangladesh or India that was like so many like exclaves and stuff, and it sort of led to people being trapped in an area in this city because they couldn't break out because then they'd be going into another country. It's just like, come on, what's going on there? But hopefully you found this interesting. Let me know your thoughts on this, and until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.